Before we begin, we'd like to ask you to tell us your name and the city you're watching from. We love getting to know our audience. Also, please don't forget to give this video a like, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel. That way, we can keep bringing you more stories like this one. The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered planks of Port Royal's docks when young Marcus Blackwater witnessed the end of his world. At 12 years old, he had already learned to read the signs that spelled trouble on the Caribbean waters. The way seagulls scattered before a storm, how honest merchants suddenly found urgent business elsewhere, and most importantly, how his father's weathered face hardened when rival ships appeared on the horizon. Captain Ezra Blackwater stood at the end of Pier 7, his coat still dripping seawater from the previous night's failed raid. The Sovereign's Revenge lay anchored in the deeper waters, her black sails furled but ready. Her crew scattered throughout the port, spending what little coin they had left. It had been 3 months since their last successful haul, and desperation clung to the ship like barnacles on her hull. Marcus crouched behind a stack of rum barrels, watching his father negotiate with merchants who grew increasingly bold in their refusal to extend credit. The boy had inherited his father's sharp eyes and quick mind, traits that served him well when eavesdropping on conversations that might determine whether the crew ate that week or went hungry once again. "Sorry, Ezra," said Willem the provisioner, a fat man whose prosperity had grown as the Blackwater fortunes declined. "Times are hard for everyone. Can't be extending credit to captains who can't guarantee payment." Captain Blackwater's hand moved instinctively to the cutlass at his hip, but he stayed his blade. "I've been good for my debts before, Willem. The Sovereign's Revenge isn't finished yet." "Perhaps not," Willem replied with the smugness of a man who held all the cards. "But word is that Captain Mordecai Kane has put a price on your head. 500 pieces of 8 to whoever brings him proof of your death. That's more silver than most of these dock rats see in a lifetime." The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Mordecai Kane, the scourge of the Caribbean, a man whose cruelty was legendary even among pirates. His ship, the Crimson Tide, was said to leave no survivors, and his crew followed him with the devotion of men who had nothing left to lose but their lives. "Kane," his father spat, the word carrying years of accumulated hatred. "That butcher's been hunting me since Nassau. What's he want with a washed-up pirate like me?" Willem shrugged, his multiple chins wobbling with the gesture. "Something about a woman named Isabella, and a treasure map you stole from him 5 years past. Kane's got a long memory for such things." Marcus saw his father's face pale beneath his weathered tan. Isabella had been his mother, dead these 3 years from fever. But she had once sailed with Kane's crew before meeting Ezra Blackwater and choosing love over piracy. The treasure map Willem mentioned was news to Marcus, but he filed the information away with the instinct of someone born to the sea. The conversation was interrupted by shouts from the harbor. A ship was approaching, a massive frigate flying black colors that snapped in the morning breeze like the wings of carrion birds. Even from a distance, Marcus could see the crimson stripe that ran along her hull, marking her as the Crimson Tide. "Speak of the devil," Willem muttered, his bravado evaporating as quickly as morning mist. "I've got business elsewhere, Ezra. Good luck to you." The fat merchant scurried away with surprising speed for his size, leaving Captain Blackwater alone on the pier. Marcus started to rise from his hiding place, but his father's sharp gesture kept him crouched among the barrels. The boy watched as his father's crew began emerging from taverns and brothels, drawn by some invisible signal that told them their captain needed them. The Crimson Tide dropped anchor with the precision of a well-drilled naval vessel. Boats were lowered, filled with men whose scarred faces and gleaming weapons spoke of violence as casually as merchants spoke of profit. Leading them was a figure that made Marcus's blood run cold, Captain Mordecai Kane himself. Kane was tall and lean, with silver hair braided with bones taken from his enemies. His coat was made from crimson silk that had probably cost more than most ships, and his sword was a Toledo blade that had tasted blood on 4 different continents. But it was his eyes that truly marked him as dangerous, pale blue like ice floating in Arctic waters, and completely without mercy. "Ezra Blackwater," Kane called out as his boats reached the dock. "You've led me quite a chase across these Caribbean waters. 5 years I've been hunting you, 5 years wondering when you'd finally surface so we could settle our accounts." Captain Blackwater stood his ground, though Marcus could see the slight tremor in his father's hands. "I've got nothing that belongs to you, Kane. Whatever grievance you think you have, it died with Isabella." Kane's laugh was like glass breaking in a cathedral. "Oh, but that's where you're wrong, old friend. Isabella took something from me when she fled my ship for your bed, something far more valuable than her considerable charms. A map, Ezra. A map to the treasure of Cocos Island, worth more than the combined plunder of every pirate who's ever sailed these waters. I don't know anything about a map, Captain Blackwater replied, but Marcus could hear the lie in his father's voice. The boy remembered his mother's sea chest, locked away in their cabin aboard the Sovereign's Revenge, and the papers she had guarded so jealously, even in her final delirium. Kane stepped closer, his boots clicking against the wet planks like a death march. Perhaps you need encouragement to refresh your memory. Boys, I think Captain Blackwater requires some assistance in recalling past events. What followed burned itself into Marcus's memory with the permanence of a brand. Kane's men fell upon his father like wolves on a wounded deer, their fists and boots finding every vulnerable spot with the expertise of professional torturers. Captain Blackwater fought back with the desperation of a cornered animal, his cutlass flashing in the morning sun. But 20 men against one was no contest even for a veteran of countless sea battles. They beat him methodically, breaking ribs with calculated precision, splitting lips and blackening eyes with the casual efficiency of men who had perfected their craft through long practice. Marcus wanted to run to his father's aid, but the paralysis of terror kept him frozen behind the rum barrels, tears streaming down his face as he watched his hero reduced to a broken, bleeding figure on the dock. "The map, Ezra," Kane said conversationally, kneeling beside the fallen captain. "Isabella hid it somewhere and you know where. Save yourself further pain and tell me what I want to know." Captain Blackwater spat blood, his voice barely above a whisper. "Go to hell, Kane. I'll die before I give you anything." Kane sighed with theatrical sadness. "I was afraid you'd say that. Very well, if you won't tell me willingly, perhaps your son will be more cooperative after he watches you die." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Kane knew he was there, had probably known from the beginning. The boy rose slowly from his hiding place, his legs shaking with fear and rage in equal measure. Kane's pale eyes fixed on him with the intensity of a predator studying prey. "Ah, there he is," Kane said with mock warmth. "Young Marcus Blackwater, future captain of nothing at all. Come here, boy. Watch closely as I finish what your father started when he stole from me." Kane drew his Toledo blade, its steel singing as it cleared the scabbard. The sword rose high above Captain Blackwater's prone form, sunlight dancing along its edge like captured lightning. Marcus found his voice at last, a scream of denial and rage that echoed across the harbor like the cry of a wounded gull. But the blade fell anyway, ending Ezra Blackwater's life and Marcus's childhood in a single, merciless stroke. Kane cleaned his sword on his father's coat before sheathing it with casual indifference. "Search the ship," he commanded his men. "Tear it apart plank by plank if necessary. The map is there somewhere." As Kane's pirates swarmed toward the Sovereign's Revenge, the captain himself approached Marcus with the unhurried gait of a man who had all the time in the world. "Now then, boy, let's discuss your future. You can tell me where your mother hid the map, and I'll make your death quick and clean. Or you can stay silent and I'll let my crew practice their rope work on your neck." Marcus looked at his father's lifeless form, at the spreading pool of blood that reflected the morning sky like a crimson mirror. Something cold and hard crystallized in his chest. Not just grief, but a rage so pure it burned away his fear like acid through canvas. "I don't know about any map," he said, his voice steady, despite the tears still flowing down his cheeks. "But I swear by my father's blood I'll kill you for this. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday I'll come back for you, Kane. And when I do, you'll pay for what you've done here." Kane laughed, genuinely amused by the boy's defiance. "Such spirit. Isabella's fire burns in your veins, I see. Very well, young Blackwater. I'll give you a chance to make good on that threat. My men will set you adrift in a dinghy with enough water for 3 days. If you survive the crossing to Tortuga, if you somehow manage to grow into the kind of man who could challenge me, then by all means, come and try your luck. I'll be waiting." The dinghy cut through Caribbean swells like a child's toy cast adrift by careless gods. Marcus Blackwater, now 13 and hardened by a year of survival that would have broken grown men, pulled steadily at the oars as Tortuga's infamous harbor came into view. The boy who had watched his father die on Port Royal's docks was gone, replaced by someone older in ways that had nothing to do with the passage of time. His hands, once soft from a captain's son's privileged life, were now calloused from rope and sail. His shoulders had broadened from months of hauling nets aboard fishing vessels and merchant ships that took pity on a young stowaway. But it was his eyes that showed the greatest change. Where once there had been innocence, now burned a cold fire that made seasoned pirates look away when he stared too long. Tortuga welcomed the desperate and the dangerous with equal indifference. The harbor reeked of tar, rum, and unwashed bodies, while the sound of drunken laughter mixed with the screams of gulls fighting over scraps thrown from tavern windows. It was here that Marcus had first learned the true lessons of piracy. Not the romantic tales of adventure his father had told, but the brutal reality of men who lived by violence and died by betrayal. Captain Red Tom Henley had been his first teacher, a grizzled veteran who commanded a small crew of cutthroats aboard a sloop called the Sea Witch. Marcus had approached him in the Drunken Sailor Tavern, offering his services as cabin boy in exchange for passage and training. Red Tom had laughed at first until the boy had demonstrated his knowledge of navigation and his willingness to shed blood when cornered by 3 drunk pirates who thought him easy prey. "You've got sand, boy," Red Tom had said, watching Marcus wipe blood from a stolen knife. "But sand alone won't keep you alive out here. You want to learn the trade? You start at the bottom and earn every lesson with sweat and pain." For 6 months, Marcus had sailed with Red Tom's crew, learning the arts of seamanship, swordplay, and the 100 small skills that separated successful pirates from shark food. He scrubbed decks until his knuckles bled, climbed rigging in hurricane winds, and fought alongside men who viewed mercy as a fatal weakness. When Red Tom was killed in a boarding action against a Spanish merchantman, Marcus had been ready to move on to his next teacher. Captain Dolores Iron Teeth Martinez commanded the brigantine Venganza, with an iron fist and a reputation for cruelty that rivaled Kane's own. She was a woman who had clawed her way to command in a world that considered females fit only for brothels and kitchens, and she had no patience for weakness in any form. Under her tutelage, Marcus learned the darker arts of piracy, interrogation, intimidation, and the psychology of fear that turned merchant crews into cooperative prisoners. "Pain is just a tool," she had told him while teaching him to extract information from captured sailors. "Like a hammer or a saw, it's only as useful as the skill of the person wielding it. Too little, and your victim thinks he can endure it. Too much, and he dies before telling you what you need to know." Marcus proved an apt student of violence, but it was his strategic mind that truly impressed his teachers. He could read tide tables like poetry, navigate by stars that most pirates couldn't even name, and plan raids with a precision that maximized profit while minimizing risk. Word of the young pirate's abilities spread through Tortuga's taverns like wildfire, reaching the ears of men who commanded larger ships and deadlier crews. The invitation had come through Captain Samuel Black Bart Morrison, a Welsh pirate whose fleet of 4 ships controlled the lucrative shipping lanes between Jamaica and the Spanish Main. Morrison's flagship, the Retribution, was a captured man-of-war that mounted 36 guns and carried a crew of over 200 men. He needed lieutenants who could think as well as fight, and Marcus's reputation had reached even his lofty circles. Their meeting took place in the back room of the Crow's Nest, Tortuga's most exclusive establishment where only the most successful captains could afford the watered-down wine and questionable company. Morrison was a tall, elegant man who wore his success like a well-tailored coat, his fingers heavy with rings taken from Spanish nobles, and his coat adorned with gold buttons that had once graced admiralty uniforms. "I've heard interesting things about you, young Blackwater," Morrison said, his Welsh accent lending music to words that carried undertones of menace. "They say you've got your father's eye for navigation and your mother's fire for revenge. Tell me, boy, what exactly do you want from this life we've chosen?" Marcus met the older pirate's gaze without flinching. "I want to build a fleet that makes Kane's Crimson Tide look like a fishing boat. I want enough ships and men to blockade entire islands, enough firepower to sink Spanish treasure fleets, and enough gold to buy loyalty from every pirate who's ever sailed these waters." Morrison raised an eyebrow. Ambitious words from someone who's barely seen 15 summers. "And what makes you think you can command such loyalty? Piracy isn't about following orders. It's about following profit. Profit is part of it," Marcus agreed. "But fear and respect matter more. Kane commands through terror. You command through success. But I intend to command through something stronger than either. The promise of revenge against everyone who's wronged us." The Welsh captain leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with the intensity of a man evaluating a potential investment. "Revenge is a luxury, boy. It doesn't put food in your crew's bellies or shot in your cannons. What happens when your vendetta against Cain conflicts with your crew's desire for easy plunder? Marcus smiled, and something in that expression made Morrison unconsciously reach for his pistol. Then I'll make sure Cain's destruction is the most profitable venture any of them have ever undertaken. The Crimson Tide carries enough treasure to make every man in my fleet rich beyond their wildest dreams. For the next 2 years, Marcus sailed as Morrison's lieutenant, leading raids that became legend throughout the Caribbean. His tactical brilliance turned impossible odds into crushing victories, while his growing reputation for ruthless efficiency attracted the kind of men who valued results over sentiment. When Morrison was killed during a failed assault on a Spanish fortress, Marcus was ready to claim command of the entire fleet. The vote was unanimous. Pirates respected strength above all else, and Marcus had proven himself in ways that transcended his youth. At 17, he commanded 4 ships and over 300 men, but he knew it wasn't enough. Cain still sailed the Caribbean with impunity. His Crimson Tide still terrorized merchant vessels, and his father's blood still cried out for vengeance from the waters of Port Royal Harbor. Standing on Tortuga's dock, watching his latest prize being fitted out for war, Marcus felt the familiar weight of destiny settling on his shoulders. The Sea Demon, a captured Spanish galleon mounting 42 guns, would serve as his flagship when the time came to face Cain. But first he needed more ships, more men, and most importantly, more allies, who shared his hatred for the man who had taken everything from him. The boy who had sworn vengeance over his father's corpse was gone, replaced by a captain whose name was whispered in fear from Port-au-Prince to Cartagena. Soon, very soon, Marcus Blackwater would return to Port Royal, not as a helpless child, but as the commander of a fleet that would make the Caribbean tremble. Cain had taught him that mercy was weakness. Now Marcus would teach Cain that some lessons, once learned, could never be forgotten. 5 years had transformed Marcus Blackwater from a promising young captain into a legend whispered about in every port from Barbados to Cuba. The fleet that assembled in the hidden cove of Dead Man's Bay was a testament to his ruthless efficiency and strategic brilliance. 12 ships of varying sizes, from nimble sloops perfect for coastal raids to massive galleons capable of engaging Spanish men of war on equal terms. 200 pirates had answered his call, each one hand-picked for their skills and their hatred of Mordecai Cain. The Sea Demon rode at anchor in the center of the flotilla, her black hull gleaming with fresh tar and her 42 cannons gleaming through open gun ports. Marcus stood on her quarterdeck, studying the intelligence reports that had taken months to gather. Cain's movements, his habits, his preferred hunting grounds, the composition of his crew. Every detail had been catalogued with the patience of a scholar and the hunger of a predator. Captain, called James Scarface Murphy, his first mate and one of the few survivors from his father's original crew. The men are assembled and ready for your address. Marcus nodded, his eyes never leaving the charts spread before him. At 22, he had grown into the kind of man who commanded attention without seeking it. Tall and lean like his father, but with a harder edge that spoke of battles fought and won. He wore his authority like a well-fitted coat. His dark hair was tied back in the fashion of successful captains, and his clothes, while practical, were cut from fine cloth that announced his status to anyone with eyes to see. The crew gathered on the main deck represented the finest killers the Caribbean had to offer. There was Captain Elena Vasquez, whose ship the Serpiente had terrorized Spanish shipping for over a decade. Captain Iron Mike O'Brien commanded the converted frigate Hellhound with a crew of Irish rebels who had fled British justice. Young Captain Thomas Fletcher, barely 20 but already notorious for his daring raids, brought the fast sloop Windcutter and 40 men who would follow him into hell itself. But it was the presence of Captain Benjamin the Butcher Hayes that truly marked this gathering as extraordinary. Hayes commanded the massive ship-of-the-line Damnation, a former Royal Navy vessel that mounted 64 guns and carried a crew of over 200 men. His support lent legitimacy to Marcus's cause, transforming what might have been seen as a personal vendetta into a Caribbean-wide coalition against Cain's tyranny. "Brothers and sisters of the sea," Marcus began, his voice carrying clearly across the assembled crews, "you know why we're here. For too long, Mordecai Cain has sailed these waters like he owns them, taking what he pleases, killing who he chooses, and leaving fear in his wake like a ship leaves foam." A rumble of agreement rose from the crowd. Kane's reputation for cruelty had made him enemies throughout the pirate community, men and women who might normally compete for prizes but who shared a common hatred for his methods. But Kane's sins go deeper than mere brutality, Marcus continued, his voice hardening. He's been systematically hunting down and killing the old captains, the ones who remember when piracy was about freedom rather than fear. My father, Ezra Blackwater, was one of his victims. So was Red Tom Henley, Iron Teeth Martinez, and a dozen others whose only crime was refusing to kneel before Kane's tyranny. This was news to many in the crowd, and Marcus could see the shift in their expressions as they realized the scope of Kane's ambitions. He wasn't content to be just another successful pirate. He wanted to be the only successful pirate, the undisputed ruler of Caribbean waters. Kane thinks he's untouchable aboard his Crimson Tide, Marcus said, pulling out a leather portfolio that contained the fruits of years of intelligence gathering. He believes his reputation alone will protect him, that no one would dare challenge his supremacy. He's about to learn how wrong he is. Marcus opened the portfolio, revealing detailed charts of Port Royal and the surrounding waters. Kane has grown comfortable, predictable in his patterns. Every month he returns to Port Royal to resupply and collect tribute from the merchants who pay him protection money. He arrives with the morning tide, stays for 3 days, and departs on the 4th dawn. His crew spreads out through the town, drinking and whoring while their captain conducts business. Captain Vasquez raised her hand, her scarred face skeptical. Port Royal's under British protection now, Marcus. Royal Navy patrols, shore batteries, Marines garrisoned in the fort. Kane might be a butcher, but he's not stupid enough to sail into a trap. Marcus smiled, and something in that expression made seasoned pirates shift uncomfortably. Kane has an arrangement with Governor Lawson. Unofficial, of course, but very real. The governor gets a percentage of Kane's plunder in exchange for safe harbor and advance warning of any naval operations. It's a partnership that served both men well for the past 3 years. This revelation sent murmurs of shock through the assembled crews. Collusion between pirates and colonial authorities was nothing new, but the scale of Kane's arrangement spoke to influence that went far beyond simple bribery. However, Marcus continued, Governor Lawson has a weakness that Kane doesn't know about. His youngest daughter contracted yellow fever last year and has been secretly receiving treatment from a French physician who happens to be deeply in debt to Captain Hayes here. The butcher grinned, his gold teeth gleaming in the Caribbean sun. Dr. Moreau has been very cooperative once I explained the consequences of refusing my requests. The good governor will receive word tomorrow that his daughter has taken a turn for the worse and requires immediate evacuation to a hospital in Martinique. He'll accompany her personally, taking his fastest ship and half the garrison's Marines as escort. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. With Lawson gone and the garrison weakened, Port Royal would be vulnerable just as Kane arrived for his monthly visit. But Marcus wasn't content with a simple ambush. He wanted to make a statement that would echo across every ocean where pirates sailed. We'll hit him at dawn on the 2nd day, Marcus explained, pointing to specific locations on the chart. Kane always anchors the Crimson Tide in the deeper water here, beyond the harbor's defensive guns. Captain Fletcher's windcutter will approach from the east, flying Spanish colors and signaling distress. When Kane sends boats to investigate, Captain Vasquez's Serpiente will emerge from behind Monkey Island and cut off his escape route to the north. The plan unfolded like a tactical masterpiece, each ship assigned a specific role in the coming battle. The Sea Demon would lead the main assault, her heavy guns silencing the Crimson Tide's cannon before Kane could bring his superior firepower to bear. Meanwhile, the smaller ships would prevent any escape while landing parties secured the town and eliminated Kane's shore-based allies. What about Kane himself? Asked Captain O'Brien, his Irish accent thick with anticipation. The man slippery as an eel and twice as poisonous. Even if we sink his ship, he might slip away in the confusion. Marcus's expression hardened, and for a moment the assembled pirates saw not their charismatic leader, but the vengeful son who had sworn an oath over his father's corpse. Kane is mine. Anyone who interferes with that will answer to me personally. I want him alive if possible. There are things I need to know before he dies. The meeting continued for another hour, finalizing details and contingencies until every captain understood their role in the coming battle. As the crews dispersed to their respective ships, Marcus remained on deck, staring toward the horizon where Port Royal lay beyond the curve of the earth. Scarface Murphy approached cautiously, recognizing the mood that had settled over his captain like storm clouds. "You're thinking about your father again," Marcus nodded slowly. Every day for 10 years, I've thought about this moment. The planning, the preparation, the gathering of allies, it's all been leading to this. In 3 days, either Kane will be dead or I will be. And if he escapes? Murphy asked quietly. Marcus turned to meet his first mate's gaze, and Murphy saw something in those dark eyes that made him grateful to be Marcus's ally, rather than his enemy. Then I'll hunt him to the ends of the earth and beyond. Kane taught me that some debts can only be paid in blood. It's time he learned that lesson himself. The fleet weighed anchor at sunset, 12 ships sailing toward destiny with black flags flying and cannon primed for war. Behind them, Dead Man's Bay returned to its usual emptiness, marked only by the bones of those who had challenged the wrong enemy at the wrong time. Ahead lay Port Royal, and the reckoning that had been 10 years in the making. The dawn mist clung to Port Royal's harbor like a shroud, muffling the sounds of a town slowly awakening to what would become the bloodiest day in its notorious history. Marcus Blackwater stood on the Sea Demon's quarterdeck, watching the crimson tide through his spyglass as Kane's crew went about their morning routines, with the casual confidence of men who believed themselves untouchable. Kane himself was visible on his ship's deck, his silver hair catching the early sunlight as he supervised the loading of supplies. After 10 years, Marcus could finally see his father's killer clearly, and the sight filled him with a cold satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice, finally within reach. Signal the fleet, Marcus commanded quietly. All ships to their positions. The carefully orchestrated plan unfolded like clockwork. Captain Fletcher's wind cutter appeared on the eastern horizon, flying Spanish colors and firing distress signals that drew immediate attention from Kane's lookouts. As predicted, Kane sent 2 boats to investigate, reducing his crew by 20 men just as the trap began to close. From behind Monkey Island, Captain Vasquez's Serpiente emerged like a predator scenting blood, her guns already trained on the Crimson Tide's stern. The Spanish ship's sudden appearance caused alarm bells to ring across Kane's vessel, but it was too late for evasive action. Marcus raised his hand, then brought it down with finality. All guns, fire! The Sea Demon's broadside erupted in thunder and flame, 42 cannons speaking in unison as they hurled iron death across the harbor. The range was perfect, the aim true, and Kane's ship shuddered under the impact of solid shot that splintered her rails and punched through her hull like a giant's fist. But Kane was not the scourge of the Caribbean by accident. Even as his ship reeled from the devastating broadside, he was shouting orders that transformed chaos into organized response. The Crimson Tide's guns roared in reply, their shots bracketing the Sea Demon with fountains of spray that soaked Marcus's crew. Reload and fire at will, Marcus commanded, drawing his cutlass as he prepared for the boarding action that would decide everything. Around him, his men worked with the precision of a naval crew, their months of training evident in every movement. The battle quickly devolved into a maelstrom of smoke, flame, and screaming metal. Ships maneuvered for advantage while cannons thundered like angry gods, each broadside claiming lives and splintering timber. The wind cutter had abandoned her deception and closed with Kane's boats, her crew cutting down the surprised pirates with methodical efficiency. But it was the duel between the 2 flagships that held everyone's attention. The Sea Demon and Crimson Tide circled each other like wounded beasts, their guns blazing at point-blank range. Marcus could see Kane across the narrowing gap, the older pirate's face twisted with rage as he realized the scope of the trap that had been laid for him. "Grappling hooks!" Marcus shouted as the ships closed to within 20 yards. "Prepare for boarding!" Iron hooks flew across the water, their lines securing the 2 vessels together despite the desperate efforts of Kane's crew to cut them free. Marcus was among the first to leap across, his cutlass parrying a thrust from a scarred pirate who died with Marcus's blade between his ribs. The deck of the Crimson Tide became a slaughterhouse as 2 crews fought with the desperation of men who knew only one side would see another sunset. Marcus cut his way through Kane's defenders with surgical precision, his years of training evident in every parry and thrust. Behind him, his crew followed like a tide of vengeance, overwhelming Kane's men through sheer skill and determination. Kane himself stood near the mainmast, his Toledo blade weaving patterns of death around him as he cut down any who dared approach. But Marcus had eyes only for his father's killer, and slowly, inevitably, the 2 captains found themselves facing each other across a circle of corpses. "So," Kane said, his voice carrying clearly despite the battle raging around them, "the whelp has grown into a wolf. I wondered when you'd come calling, boy. 10 years is a long time to nurse a grudge. Not long enough, Marcus replied, raising his cutlass in salute before assuming a fighting stance. You taught me that some debts can only be paid in blood. I'm here to settle mine. Cain laughed, the sound devoid of humor. Your father died because he was weak, boy. Weakness is a disease in these waters, and I was merely the cure. My father died because you're a coward who murders better men than yourself. Marcus shot back. But you won't die easy, Cain. I've got 10 years of questions that need answering first. The two pirates circled each other warily, each looking for an opening in the other's defense. Cain was older but more experienced, his blade moving with the fluid grace of a master swordsman. Marcus was younger and stronger, his technique polished by years of training under the Caribbean's finest teachers. Cain struck first, his Toledo blade whistling through the air in a cut designed to take Marcus's head from his shoulders. But Marcus had anticipated the attack, ducking under the swing and replying with a thrust that opened a line of red along Cain's ribs. First blood to me, Marcus said with grim satisfaction. How does it feel to bleed, Cain? You've spilled so much blood over the years. I wonder if you remember what it's like. Cain's response was a flurry of attacks that forced Marcus to give ground, the older pirate's blade seeming to be everywhere at once. But Marcus had learned patience along with swordplay, and he waited for his moment with the calm certainty of someone who had planned this encounter down to the smallest detail. The opening came when Cain overextended on a particularly vicious thrust. Marcus sidestepped and brought his pommel down on Cain's wrist, numbing the older man's sword arm and causing him to drop his weapon. Before Cain could recover, Marcus had his blade at the pirate's throat. Yield, Marcus commanded, his voice carrying absolute authority. Yield, and I'll give you the same mercy you showed my father. Cain's pale eyes blazed with hatred, but he was beaten and knew it. Around them, the battle was winding down as the last of Cain's crew either surrendered or died fighting. The Crimson Tide was won, and with it, the Caribbean's most feared pirate. You think this changes anything, boy? Cain spat, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. Kill me and another will take my place. The strong prey on the weak, that's the law of these waters. You're wrong, Marcus replied quietly. The law of these waters is about to change. Your reign of terror ends here, Cain. But first, you're going to tell me about my mother's map and the treasure of Cocos Island. Cain's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with calculation. So that's what this is really about. You want Isabella's legacy, the treasure she stole from me before running off with your fool of a father. I want justice for my father's murder, Marcus corrected. The treasure is just a means to ensure that justice extends to everyone who suffered under your tyranny. As the sun climbed higher over Port Royal's harbor, Marcus Blackwater stood victorious on the deck of his enemy's ship, surrounded by the bodies of men who had thought themselves untouchable. The boy who had sworn vengeance over his father's corpse was finally satisfied, but the man he had become understood that true victory lay not in revenge, but in the world he would build from its ashes. Cain's execution would wait until the treasure was recovered, and the Caribbean's balance of power had shifted permanently. Some lessons Marcus had learned were worth teaching slowly.